So now, before I get into the meat of the steps, I would just like to provide a brief summary of what the four cardinal virtues are. So, the life of the alcoholic in his cups can be summarized as the subjection of reason to desire. This is the spiritual malady, the dysfunction of the spiritual will and intellect caused by disordered emotions. Our emotions aren't intrinsically bad, but there is a hierarchy in the human person, and the lower parts of the soul are meant to serve the higher. Our emotions are meant to inspire us and drive us towards the good that the intellect and the will know. Uh, Only the intellect can know the end of life. If someone's life is dominated by fear and the desire for pleasure, he cannot find his end. As I have said, addiction is the vicious pursuit of integrity. This is the problem. Therefore, recovery must necessarily restore integrity. This is the solution. It is the four cardinal virtues that cause integrity of being. Therefore, in order to cause recovery, the steps must be acts of the four cardinal virtues. Cardinal means hinge, and it is on this hinge of the four cardinal virtues that the man's moral life opens and closes. We have already talked about prudence. Prudence manifests itself in the life of the individual practically as justice, temperance, and fortitude. Justice is a virtue that perfects the will and is defined as the constant, perpetual will to render each person his due. This speaks to the fundamental truth that human relationships must be founded on equality. Before there can be an act of justice, something must be due. And in order to pay what is due, it must be recognized. This is where prudence comes in. Prudence is the intellectual component that informs the act of justice that makes it just. Justice is strictly about the other, but it goes deeper than that. We can say that following the law is just and that breaking of a law is unjust. If you break a law, rectification is needed, restoring what is owed, restoring of what is lost. The human person is governed by a law that is based on his essence. He is ordered to certain ends. Breaking of that law goes against his nature and is therefore unjust. I will be looking at the steps from the perspective of rectifying what the alcoholic has lost through violation of the natural law. Fortitude is the virtue that governs the emotion of fear. It speaks to the significant role that fear plays in our lives. Most do not address the role fear plays in their lives, and if they do not, they will be ruled by it. This virtue reveals a basic human truth about the human person, that we are vulnerable, that we can be hurt and die. The virtue of fortitude doesn't mean that one has no fear, but that one does the right thing despite his fear. In other words, reason rules emotion. Fortitude has to do with the mean between foolhardiness and cowardliness. Fortitude is not blind to danger. It contains a right estimation of the danger involved in an act and the good to be gained by that act. The vice contrary to fortitude manifests itself as selfishness that seeks to preserve itself at all costs, that recognizes no greater good than the self. A life governed by the selfish seeking of pleasure has no need for fortitude, for there is no greater good for which risk is needed. Such a person lives in a small world and is inevitably full of self-loathing. The ultimate act of fortitude is to die for a greater good. This applies to the soldier as well as to the addict. Why? Because recovery boiled down is just a change. When a change is made, something must cease to be, and something new must come to be. In other words, something must die. In order for the addict to recover, there must be a death. It is this death the addict instinctively fears, and this fear must be governed by the virtue of fortitude if the addict is to recover. The Big Book says, as we approach the steps, we must be fearless from the very beginning. This tells me that each of the steps has a relationship to fear. It is from this perspective that I will analyze the steps. The purpose and goal of the virtue of temperance is man's inner order. which is called integrity. As I have said, the problem of the spiritual malady is lack of internal order, and our addiction is the vicious pursuit of integrity. Therefore, if the steps are to be a solution, one must effect genuine integrity. The lion's share of recovery is the practice of temperance. Temperance orders the emotional life to reason, specifically the emotions of love, hate, sensible satisfaction, desire, and sorrow, uh, all part of the concupiscible appetite. Temperance manifests as a reasonable use of food and drink and sex. Food and drink and sex are necessary and powerful forces in our life, and they can destroy us if we are immoderate. Temperance is reasonable because it finds the means between two extremes. Aristotle said that all virtue is found in the mean. It is through intemperance that selfishness manifests. Because we are made to love God, selfishness runs contrary to our nature. This is why the life of the addict is so damaging, because at a fundamental level he is violating his being. It is through intemperance that we let desire run our lives. Both temperance and intemperance involve an inward focus, a turning toward the self. In temperance, this is a selfless focus for the purpose of maintaining internal order for a greater good. In intemperance, this is a selfish focus where one pursues one's end within oneself, i.e., pleasure. The truth is expressed in sacred scripture. He who loves his life will lose it. Man is a rational animal, so if he is to live according to his nature, he is to live a rational life. When a man pursues the truth despite his feelings, this subjection of desire creates order in the soul. The fruit of order is serenity. The alcoholic who achieves serenity does so because he is temperate. Serenity is a powerful state of being that is more powerful than an emotion. If someone's soul is ordered, then they have serenity, despite the fact that they might not be experiencing negative emotions. Because intemperance runs contrary to reason, its fruit is blindness, which manifests itself as blindness to the self. If the addict is to gain temperance, he must pursue the truth despite his desire, specifically the truth of oneself. It is from this perspective I will analyze the steps. Prudence determines the reason and truth that orders the acts of temperance and fortitude. But acts of fortitude and temperance frees the intellect from emotion, so prudence can operate, so that prudence can operate, so genuine acts of virtue must contain them all.